Thanks very much. How are you guys doing today? That's good. Well, I'm going to tell you my story. Anybody in here that's 19 years old? You guys are all older than 19. Okay, all right. So when this picture was taken, I was 19, as I just became the captain of the Seattle chapter, maybe about 5 months earlier. But there's thousands of stories that can be told about the Black Panther Party. And each one is different. Each one has a different perspective. And after Huey was killed, I decided that I wanted to tell my story. And I wanted to do something a little different than other books that had been told, so I really kind of started talking about my ancestors, because that is really why all of us who were in the Black Panther Party got involved in the movement and in the struggle, and particularly the Black Panther Party, because the connection that we had with our past, with our ancestors. And I grew up in what was called the oral tradition. Anybody in here know what the oral tradition is? The oral tradition is something that is very important to indigenous communities and people of color, because the oral tradition was a way that we could connect young people to the past. And so elders were always sharing, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents were always sharing their stories with their young people about what happened to them. What happened to them during Jim Crow, what happened to them during segregation in the 30s and 40s, what happened in slavery. I lived in a house with my great-great-grandmother who was born in 1867. Her mother was a slave. And you know, we always heard stories about her. Her name was Mariah. All I know, she was a little black bow-legged woman, and that she had five kids. But that connected me to slavery. You know, this connected us to our past. And hearing these stories over and over and over again, you know, it had an effect on us. And the reason why the oral tradition exists is because it served as a way of keeping the family history, keeping the culture alive, connecting young people to the past. And what that does is it gives you a sense of purpose. It gives you a sense of grounding. It gives you a sense of where you came from. It gives you a sense of meaning and what you're supposed to do. And that's why they had the oral tradition, to use it as a system of helping young people to continue on the family and the community and the history and the struggle. And so, you know, that was what my generation grew up on. And also, we also had the opportunity to watch the civil rights movement unfold, because when we were growing up, there were only 4 TV channels. You know, there was, you know, 4, 5, 7, and 11 or 13 or something like that, and they went off at midnight. So, and when the news came on, we knew during the 60s that there were going to be some black people on TV. So we always gathered around the TV to watch what Martin Luther King was doing, what Medgar Evers was doing, what was taking place in the Deep South during the fight to end segregation. And so it was almost daily on the news that we got to watch all of these things take place. You know, the young people demonstrating, and the dogs being turned on the demonstrators, and the hoses being turned on the young kids, and Bull Connor getting on TV saying we're going to get rid of these niggers, and a church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, where the 4 little black girls were killed, and the news coverage of the 3 civil rights leaders that were killed as well. And so, you know, watching these things over and over again, it had an effect on us. You know, it had an effect on my generation, you know, seeing this movement being played out on TV over and over and over again. Then also, not to mention the fact that during the 60s, it was an era of assassinations, political assassinations. And the first major political assassination that I will never forget, and we will never forget, is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He was the first Irish Catholic president to be elected to the presidency. And he was the first president that really seemed to really support the fight against segregation in the South, him and his brother, Robert Kennedy. And they refused to, the CIA wanted John F. Kennedy to invade Cuba. They wanted John F. Kennedy to send more troops to Vietnam, but he refused to do those things. And because he refused to do those things, he was assassinated. And so this was very devastating for the black community, because this is the first time we had somebody in that position that was really going to support us. And so that was one of the first major assassinations that my generation had to grow up on. That was one of the first times I ever saw my father cry. I never saw my father cry before. He was a very strong man. But when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he did. And it was only a year later that another assassination took place. That was the assassination of Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers was one of the most powerful civil rights leaders that there was. He was right up there with Martin Luther King. He's not talked about as much as he should be. And Medgar Evers, the thing about Medgar Evers is that he believed in self-defense. He armed himself, and he believed in defending himself with a weapon. And so he was assassinated. And so that was a big blow to the civil rights movement. And a year later, there's another assassination. That was the assassination of Malcolm X. And you know, we all grew up, we knew who Malcolm X was. We listened to his speeches, and to have him assassinated that way was really devastating. But one thing that happened when Malcolm X was assassinated, these two young men in Oakland, California, named Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, got together and said, we need to do something. We need to form an organization that is going to take off where Malcolm left off. Because Malcolm, when he had passed away, when he was assassinated, he had formed an organization in Harlem. And it was going to be a much different organization from the Nation of Islam, because he had traveled to Africa, and he saw other people who were of other complexions that were Muslim, who thought very much like he did. So he began to realize and began to look at the struggle that we had in the U.S. was much bigger, was much broader. It was a struggle of oppressed people all over the world. And so that's what he began to work towards before he was assassinated. So Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale stepped up, and they began to create this organization called the Black Panther Party. So in Seattle, after the assassination of Malcolm, in 1967, I started as a student at the University of Washington. There were only 30 black students there at the time, and we formed the first black student union at the University of Washington, and we started doing work in the community as well. And we led a demonstration against this high school because they didn't have any teachers of color, and there was a fight that broke out between a white student and a black student. The black student got kicked out, nothing happened to the white student. So we organized a demonstration, and we led a march into the school, and we closed the school down. And so that was like a first major victory for us. And we were very happy that we were able to close that school down. But a week later, we were arrested. And I found myself in Alameda, in the King County Jail, along with other leaders of the BSU. And while we're sitting in the jail, this is April 4th, a news report comes on. And let me just go back a little bit further. Before I even got into college, when I was about 12 years old, Martin Luther King came to Seattle. And I got a chance to march with Martin Luther King when I was about 13 years old. And I remember at the end of the march, he got on the bandstand. He began talking to the sea of people that were there. And I remember I had made my way up to the bandstand and was sitting on the edge of the bandstand and looking out to the crowd, because I had already seen people get assassinated, and I didn't want to see Martin get assassinated. So I kind of like designated myself as a lookout, as crazy as that may seem. So, and after that meeting Martin Luther King, I got involved in the civil rights movement in Seattle, and I went on marches and pickets and sang all the songs, "We Shall Overcome," and all those things. And I even volunteered for the first school voluntary integration program to integrate the white schools. And so I volunteered to, go to this white school way across where black people were not allowed to go to, and integrate this white school when I was in the 8th grade. And after a couple of years, that didn't work out. That was the first time I really ran into that brick wall of racism, and so I came back to the community. So jumping ahead to April 4th, 1968, we're sitting in the King County Jail, and the news comes on, and they announced that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And this was devastating news, because, we had known Martin Luther King, we had watched him. He was a man of peace, he was a man of love, and now he's assassinated. And riots started breaking out all across the country. Walter Cronkite the news was going to Harlem and New York and New Jersey and Detroit and Chicago, and these riots, young people were out on the street just going crazy. Because of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And of course we wanted to be out there too. We wanted to be out there rioting and expressing our anger, but we weren't able to do that because we were sitting in the King County Jail. But I remember that night, I remember going back to my bunk, and I remember saying to myself, that my picket sign, I was going to put down my picket sign, and my picket sign was going to be replaced by a gun, by the gun. And we finally got out of jail, and had an opportunity about 3 days later to go to San Francisco to the second Black Student Union Conference, and that's where we met Bobby Seale. Now, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, a lot of people don't realize this, but when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there were people here in Oakland in the Black Panther Party who decided upon themselves that they were going to go out and seek revenge against the murder of Martin Luther King. Now, orders had already been given that what the Panthers were supposed to do was go out on the streets and stop people from rioting. But because Huey was in jail and Bobby Seale was in jail as well, Eldridge Cleaver had decided upon himself that he was going to get the Panthers together and to go out on the street and seek revenge. Now, one of the young men that was with this group of Panthers was a young man named Little Bobby Hutton. I'm sure you guys know about Little Bobby Hutton. He joined the party when he was 14 years old. He learned how to read, he learned how to write. As a member of the Black Panther Party, learned how to do math, rose up to be treasurer of the Black Panther Party. And so in the course of them trying to seek revenge, there was a shootout. Little Bobby and Eldridge ran into an abandoned house in West Oakland. The house was surrounded by the police. They shot thousands of rounds into the house. They decided they had to give up. Little Bobby Hutton threw his M1 carbine out, and they came out and raised their hands up and surrendered. And the police told Little Bobby to run to the police car. Little Bobby did, and he was shot 20 times. So Little Bobby became the first to join and the first to die. And that was because of the death of Martin Luther King. People don't realize it was Malcolm's death and Martin's death Malcolm's death led to the formation of the Black Panther Party. Martin Luther King's death led to the tremendous spread of the Black Panther Party. Because when Martin Luther King was killed, young people all across the country began to say that we got to create something stronger. We got to create a stronger organization. We're going to have to start taking up arms because they're killing our leaders. They're killing our leaders. And so I didn't realize, you know, when I said that, when I decided that I was going to do that, I didn't realize that thousands of young people all across the country came to the same conclusion that I came to. And it wasn't just black youth, it was white youth, it was Latino youth, it was Native American youth, it was youth of all color, Asian youth, who also, because we all watched Martin Luther King. We all knew that Martin Luther King was a man of love. He was a man of peace. And when they killed Martin Luther King, they killed the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was no more after the assassination of Martin Luther King. So this new organization began to come up and fill the role, take that role. That was the Black Panther Party. So when we went down to the Black Student Union Conference, they were having little Bobby's funeral, and we heard about it over in Oakland, so we went and bought some berets in San Francisco, and we got in the car and we drove over to Oakland because we wanted to fit in with our berets, and we, you know, went to the little white church in West Oakland, and we saw Marlon Brando standing out front. You know, guys know Marlon Brando, one of the greatest actors that ever lived. He's standing out front. He's got a black leather jacket on, a black beret. He's talking to Bobby Seale. And so we get out and we go into the church and we hear the crying and moaning of the Hutton family. You know, Bobby Hutton's mother, his aunts and uncles, they're all crying and they're all reaching out, reaching to the casket where little Bobby Hutton is laying. And we see the Panthers in their uniforms, you know, around the perimeter of the inside of the church. And so it was very moving. It was a very moving affair to be in there and watch the preparation to send little Bobby Hutton to the next phase of his soul. So after that, we talked to Bobby Seale and we told him we wanted a chapter of the Black Panther Party in Seattle. So a week later, he comes to Seattle. We had already been organizing. We already had about 25 young people. Some had been in the BSU. Some were just brothers from the streets that were hanging out. And we met at my parents' house. Some people brought their rifles to the meeting. And Bobby Seale and George Murray, the Minister of Education from San Francisco State, came up and met with us, and one of the first things that Bobby Seale said was, in order to be a member of the Black Panther Party, you had to have 2 weapons and 2,000 rounds of ammunition. So that was pretty heavy. But then George Murray tells us, the Minister of Education, he gives us a book list of 25 books that we have to read, and that we have to read 2 hours a day, and we have to have political education class twice a week. And we were given a list of rules for members of the Black Panther Party. And then that was the beginning of the Seattle chapter, the first chapter outside the state of California. So now, about a week later, I get a call from Bobby Seale. Actually, Bobby Seale was on his way to New York from Seattle, him and George Murray. And he wanted me to go with him. But I wasn't ready. You know, I just wasn't ready, to be quite honest with you. I had to kind of like sit down and kind of figure out, am I ready to be the captain of this militant organization? So, but a week later, Bobby Seale calls me up and he tells me to come down to Oakland. So this was the first time I ever flew in an airplane. I hop in the airplane, I got my leather jacket on, I got my beret on, my powder blue shirt, black pants, and I'm very nervous. You know, I'm nervous because I know these brothers down in Oakland are some rough revolutionaries. I'm just a 19-year-old college student, you know. So when I get off the plane, I see these 2 brothers, you know, one with a big afro and got their leather jackets on, and they come and greet me, and they greet me very warmly, Robert Bay and Tommy Jones, and they take me over to the office on Grove Street, and we pull up, and this Panther standing out front, and you know, they greet me very warmly, and the Robert Bay takes me around to the house where he's staying with 2 other Panthers, Landon Williams and Randy Williams, who are both captains in the Black Panther Party now. Landon and Randy had been in special forces in Vietnam, When they left Vietnam, they came and joined the Black Panther Party, and now they were captains in the BPP. And so they greeted me very warmly, Landon and Randy, and one of the first things they did was they went into their rooms and came out to show me their weapons. You know, each one of them had their own armament of weapons. You know, they began to show me their reloading equipment, how they made their own bullets, and you know, showing me their shotguns and everything. And so I spent a couple of days. I had to go up to visit Huey at the Alameda County Jail. And I was really nervous going to visit Huey because I only knew him of that person in the poster. And we chit-chatted a little bit. And you know, one of the things that he told me, he said, you never turn your back towards the pigs because they'll shoot you in the back. That was one of the things that I really remember that he told me. And so I went out to the field and sold papers with some of the Panther comrades. Market down in about downtown in West Oakland. Housewives, yeah. We went down there and sold papers and met people in the community, and then I finally caught up with Bobby Seale, and we went to Grove Street College. He met with some students, and we drove over to San Francisco to a meeting in San Francisco, and Don Cox, the field marshal, this was his house, and we went to his house. And Stokely Carmichael was there, and David Hilliard was there, and Captain Crutch, and Bill Brent, and you know, some of the older guys who were in the party at that time were there, and we started having a meeting, and they were meeting about the rules of the Black Panther Party. I remember Don Cox, the field marshal, he came out of his back room, and he said, hey Chairman, look, we got some of these. He had a rifle. It was called a Santa Fe Trooper. He said, we got a whole bunch of these in, Chairman. And that rifle will be known as a Panther Special. So after that meeting, I ended up back at the house with Robert Bay and Landon and Randy and Orlando Harris, who went to Sacramento, who was a good friend of Little Bobby's, who was the same age as Little Bobby, Orlando Harris. And so they decided to introduce me to the Panther Drink. And so the Panther Drink was Bitter Dog. So that's what the street name was. That's what the brothers on the street drank, was dark port wine and lemon juice. And so you pour a little bit of wine out, you squeeze the lemon juice in, you shake it up. So, and the Panthers called it Panther Piss. So we start drinking. You know, we're drinking the Panther Piss in the kitchen. And then they said, man, you want some Brother Rugie? I don't know what Brother Rugie was. So they put out some marijuana. That was a code name for marijuana, so we started smoking Brother Rugie. So I'm feeling a little more comfortable now. I'm relaxing a little bit. And now Landon Williams did not smoke or drink. He didn't get high at all. So he's in the front room watching TV. And you know, the only thing that was in the front room was a TV, a chair, and that was it. And so while we're in the kitchen, we hear this loud gunshot, a loud bang, and everybody runs into the living room. And Robert Bay said, man, what did you do, man? What'd you do? And Landon had taken his .44 Magnum out and shot the TV out. He said, man, why'd you shoot the TV out? Man, I got tired of the cowboys and Indians, and the Indians always getting killed. I got tired of that shit. Landon blew his TV out. I said, damn, man. So they said, well, let's go get something to eat. So they said, let's go get something to eat. I said, oh, so we went down to West Oakland to get something to eat. This is Friday, West Oakland, about 6 o'clock. And, you know, we go into the restaurant, we get something to eat. Me and Orlando, we finished early, so we went outside to smoke a cool cigarette. So we're standing on the corner smoking a cool cigarette. Now, this is only 2 weeks after the death of little Bobby Hutton. Not only was little Bobby Hutton killed, but there were 18 Panthers that were arrested, and several of them had been wounded. So there was a tremendous amount of tension at that moment between the Black Panther Party and the Oakland Police Department. So a police car drives up, and Orlando, he's only 16 years old, being young and brash, he starts yelling. He started yelling, pigs, you MF pigs, you better stop at that stop sign, you know, because he's mad. He's mad that little Bobby Hutton has been killed. So he's yelling. So I jumped in, I'm yelling too. So we're both yelling, you pigs, you MF pig, blah, 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 blah. So the police goes around the corner, he comes back, and he calls for backup. And so these police cars start coming and coming and coming, and they start jumping out of their cars, and a strange thing began to happen, because this is Friday night in the ghetto, and at that time everybody's out enjoying themselves, having a good time, drinking and spending their welfare checks and everything. But people start saying things like, we start hearing people say, man, I'm getting out of here, man. It's going to be a shootout. And people start running home, and shops start closing, and pretty soon Landon and Randy and Robert Bay and Tommy Jones come out of the restaurant. And by this time, it's about 10, 12 policemen that are out there standing on the corner. And so pretty soon, the streets are almost deserted. Everybody's gone. The shops have closed, everything. And then the prostitutes are across the street. They said, we ain't going nowhere. We're going to stay out here and see what happens to our brothers. So, and the police they're all bunched up. They're all bunched up, and they're showing a lot more fear than what we're showing. Not that we weren't fearful, but they were showing it because they were all bunched together. And I remember Robert Bay. Robert Bay he was a Vietnam vet, but he was short, very stocky, had a big afro. He says in his deep voice, he says, spread out. And I had just been given a 9mm and a shoulder holster earlier that day, because I didn't have a handgun. And so I had just been given one. So we're all armed. And so we began to spread out. We spread out, and I just remember, you know, as people are running home, I see this young man with a McClymon's leather jacket on. He's got a bag of groceries in his hands, and I'm scared. I'm not gonna lie. And I'm saying to myself, I'm looking at this brother, I'm saying, man, I wish he would stay here and help. I wish he would stay in here and help. And I swear he must have heard what I was saying, because he looked at me dead in the eye and said, brother, I would stay here and help, but I got to get home. And he's gone. He's gone. So now the streets are completely deserted. The streets are complete. It's just us and them out there. And there's one of the officers, it must have been to Vietnam, because he wasn't showing no fear, one of the police officers. And he had his hand on his gun, and he started walking towards Landon. And we all have our hands on our guns. And he started saying to Landon, I'm gonna search you. And Landon said, no, you ain't gonna search me. And Landon's backing up, and the police is walking towards him. And Landon said, no, you ain't gonna search me. I'm thinking, damn, Landon shut his TV out. You know, tell him what Landon's gonna do. So he's walking towards Landon. Landon's backing up, and I'm thinking, I'm seeing my childhood flash up in front of me, and I'm thinking, well, this is it. This is it. This is it for me, you know. But I'm here, and I'm not going to go anywhere. And just when we thought that something was going to happen, I mean, the tension was so tight, you could have cut it with a knife. And as Landon is backing up, he trips over a garbage can, but he jumps right back up, and he still had his hand on his gun. And that cut the ice right there, because the police just stopped. They stopped what they were doing, they turned around, and they got in their cars, and they drove off. And so that was my introduction into the Black Panther Party that night. That was the same corner that Huey had his shootout with the Oakland police on 7th and Wood. It was the same corner on 7th and Wood. So we gave our guns to the prostitutes, because we figured the police were going to come back with reinforcements. And the prostitutes knew all the Panthers, and we knew they would be able to get them back the next day, which we did. And so the next day we had it was Saturday, and every Saturday they had that weekly meeting for Panthers from all over the Bay Area. And Panthers would come from Palo Alto, San Mateo, Vallejo, everywhere, San Francisco, and about 125 brothers and sisters in there, and there was just so much energy in there at St. Augustine's Church, and it was just tremendous being there and meeting these brothers and sisters who had committed themselves as revolutionaries to the struggle. And so after the meeting, Robert Bay and Tommy Jones and I hopped in the car, and we went back down Grove Street back to the house. So when we get to the house, the phone rings. Robert Bay runs in, he grabs the phone, he says, yeah. He slams the phone down, he runs into the room, He comes out with some rifles and a box of ammo. He said, the pigs are vamping on the comrades at the church. So we hop in the car. He hands me a rifle and a box of ammo. He asked me, he said, you know how to load that weapon? I said, yeah. I never saw that weapon before, but I figured it out. So I'm sitting in the back seat. I'm saying, damn, here we go again. You know, we speeding down Grove Street about 50, 60 miles an hour. And when we get to the church, there was nobody there. The police weren't there. There were no Panthers there. And so I was relieved that nothing was going to happen that night. And so the next day I was on my flight and I was on my way back to Seattle. And I was prepared now. I knew what it was about to be in the Black Panther Party, and I was prepared to organize a chapter of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. And so we opened our office up. We got chairs and stuff donated, and we got our phones turned on, and you know, the phones start ringing as soon as we got it turned on, and people start calling for all kinds of problems and issues they had in the community, because this is the first time the community had somebody that they could call, you know, and say, could you help me with something, you know, without, you know, the police coming down and shooting everybody in the process trying to help you, you know. So we got calls for domestic violence. We got a call from a woman whose the landlord had taken the door off his hinges because she got behind on the rent, and she had 7 kids. And so we sent Panthers down to the landlord's house. They got the door and carried it back and put it back on, you know. And at this time in Oakland, I mean in Seattle, just like in Oakland, it was not illegal to carry a weapon out in the open. And so just as the party started in Oakland, they exercised their right to carry weapons. They exercised the right of the Second Amendment of the Constitution to carry weapons, to teach black people that they had a right to defend themselves. And so we began to do the same thing in Seattle. We began to carry our weapons everywhere we went because it was not illegal to do it. So when we got calls for domestic violence, you know, somebody was getting beat up by their husband or their boyfriend or something, you know, we sent, you know, 5 armed Panthers over there, and you know, that would be the end of that. So this was a new day for the community. Now I had been talking to Bobby Seale every week and sending in weekly reports, and he had told me, he said, you know how the community likes to take advantage of a good thing. And so, Dixon, you need to stop going out on all these community calls. And so I said, okay, right on, Chairman. So, but on Monday, we got a call from a black mother whose son was going to an all-white school called Rainier Beach, which is now an all-black school, that her son got beat up, and the principal wouldn't do anything about it. She wanted us to come out there. I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't come. Well, she called on Tuesday, same problem. Sorry, we can't come. Wednesday, can't come, ma'am. Thursday, can't come. Friday, she called, she was crying. A lot of the white students had bought knives and chains to school. They were on a rampage beating up black kids, and the principal wouldn't do anything about it. We got another call from another black mother. The same thing was going on. And so it just so happened on that particular day, that afternoon, when those calls came in, there were about 13 comrades in there. Everybody had their rifles and their shotguns, and we decided we're going to Rainier Beach. So we hopped in our cars, we drove out there. When we got there, we saw about 20 policemen standing outside on the side because it had gotten so out of hand that they had came. And so by this time, we were determined to see justice done. We were determined to deal with this problem. And so we got out of our cars with our rifles and shotguns. We crossed the street, and there was a fat sergeant that met us at the door. He said, Dixon, you can't take those loaded weapons in there. And we knew the gun laws. The gun laws state that if you're carrying a weapon, a bullet is not in the chamber, and you know a bullet's not in the chamber, then it's considered unloaded. So I just said they're not loaded, which meant it's not chambered. And we just went on into the building. The principal saw us, he took off running. Some of the comrades went and got him, they brought him back, and we set him down, and we said, look, if you don't protect these black kids, then we're going to protect them. And he was very nervous, very shaken, and he promised that he was going to protect the kids. And so we got out, and we backed our way across the street, because I remember what Huey said, you never turn your back to the pigs. We backed our way across the street, keeping an eye on the police. We got in the cars and drove back to the CD. So that was kind of like a defining incident that really defined the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. So we did not know that J. Edgar Hoover, Attorney General John Mitchell, and Richard Nixon, by this time Black Panther Party spread it all across the country. Every major city in America has a chapter of the Black Panther Party. And J. Edgar Hoover, Richard Nixon, Attorney General John Mitchell, they called a press conference that the Black Panther Party was the #1 threat to security of America. Now, we had no idea that they had talked amongst themselves that they were going to have us wiped out by 1969. And I just recently found out that they were going to have us killed off by 1969. And so they started raiding offices all across the country, and many of the chapters were heavily infiltrated by FBI and local police authorities. There were chapters that never fully got off the ground, like the Baltimore chapter was actually started by the FBI. And one of the leaders of the Baltimore chapter eventually got caught up on conspiracy to commit murder, and he went to prison. He just got out of prison last week after 44 years. 44 years, he just got out. But the same thing happened in the Nebraska chapter. There were two young brothers who were organizing the Nebraska chapter, and they got caught up by some police informants. A bomb went off, and somebody was killed, and they went to prison. And to this very day, they're in prison for 43, 44 years. And New Jersey chapters, the same thing happened with the New Jersey, head of the New Jersey chapter. So they began to, raid Panther offices all across the country. And then, one thing about the Black Panther Party is because we read a lot, we understood that nothing stood outside of change. We understood we always had to be changing. We couldn't do the same thing that we were doing the year before. We always had to be changing our tactics. So it became very apparent to us that our uniforms were scaring the community away from us, as well as us carrying our guns. So we stopped wearing our uniform, we stopped carrying our weapons around. We also got orders to start what was called our survival programs. Because the Vietnam War was taking place, there was a lot of resources that were going for the war instead of going into the community. So a lot of people were really having a difficult time trying to feed their families and feed their kids. So one of the first programs that we started was a free breakfast for school children program. And when we got the order, we got the bulletin that was sent to us, said all Black Panther Party chapters and branches are to implement a free breakfast for school children program. And it was no blueprint laid out about how to do this. We just got the order. And there were a handful of people that said, man, I ain't feeding no kids, that ain't revolutionary. And they left. They left the party because they did not see the importance of feeding hungry kids. And so we began to implement this breakfast program. And within 4 or 5 months, we opened up 5 different locations all throughout the city of Seattle. And all the housing projects, we had breakfast programs. And we went to community centers and churches near elementary school. We asked them if we could use their facilities. And then we got food donated from outside of the community and inside the community. Now, the first breakfast program we had, my mother always reminds me of this, we raided her refrigerator for the first breakfast program. But so we created these breakfast programs all across the country. Chicago chapter was feeding thousands of kids. The LA chapter was feeding thousands of kids. The New York chapter was feeding thousands of kids. So here we are, now we're feeding all these kids all over the country. We're literally feeding thousands of kids. Nutritional breakfast, toast and sausage and eggs and bacon and pancakes and oatmeal and grits and all those wonderful things that kids need, in order to go to school to learn. And then we got orders to open up a free medical clinic because there were no community medical clinics at that time. And when we got the order, we had already had a doctor named Dr. John Green who came and told us that he was going to be our physician. And so we told Dr. John Green we got to open up a medical clinic. And so there was this brother named Valentine Hobbs who was in the military, and he ended up in Seattle, and he joined the Black Panther. He was a black nationalist. when he joined the party, and he didn't like working with white people. But the Black Panther Party was an international organization. We understood the importance of working with everybody. We understood that this movement wasn't just about black people, it was about humanity. And that's what we were trying to do. That's what the Black Panther Party was about, was trying to create a new world, trying to create a different world so that everybody had the right to express themselves. And so, you know, we gave Valentine the orders because he always wanted to be a doctor and he had some medical skills, so we said, okay, you got to open up this clinic. So we started working with Dr. John Green, and we opened up the first free medical clinic in the Northwest. And that medical clinic is still open today. And the Black Panther Party would go on to open up 11 free medical clinics all across the country. And in Harlem and North Carolina, they started a free ambulance program because the running joke in the community was that ambulance is not going to come to the ghetto. We said, fine, we'll get our own ambulance. And that's what they did in Harlem. And so we began to open up, create a lot of other programs. We started the first, they have food banks here? Now, people don't know that the food banks came from the Black Panther Party. We started giving out bags of groceries out of our community centers once a week. You know, that's where the food banks came from. Then we started a free clothing program. We started a free shoe program. One of the most important programs that we started was the Busing the Prisons program, because we realized, how is Mrs. Jones, who doesn't have any money and doesn't have a car, how's she going to go visit her son in this prison that's 4 or 5 hours away? So we got some cars, we got some vans. We started going to, every weekend we go to a different prison, and somebody donated a 35-passenger bus to us in Seattle. Somebody donated a Greyhound bus to the Chicago chapter. And so our Busing the Prisons program really kicked off. And we began to do a lot of other things of working with people in the prisons, taking shows into the prisons and all kinds of things. If you were in the Black Panther Party around this time, around 1969, your day started at 6 in the morning. You got up at 6, you went down to the breakfast program, you fed the kids, you came back from the breakfast program, and you had to go out and sell 100 papers a day. Every Panther had orders to sell 100 papers a day all across the country because we knew the importance of the newspaper. The Black Panther newspaper was one of the most important things that we had because it educated the community about what was happening, not only what was happening, but about what the Black Panther Party was about, and also what was happening in the world. We had an international section in our newspaper. We talked about the revolutionary movements in South America, in Africa, in Palestine, and we were connecting to all these other movements all over the world. And so that's why, and you know, we were taught this, that power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. That means if you have that power, who is defining what is happening. That if you are able to define what is happening in your community, then you know what's wrong, you know what you got to do to fix it, and then you have the power to fix it. That's what the breakfast programs, that's what the medical care, that's what all those survival programs were about, is that we defined what was happening in our community. And from us being able to define it, we were able to create the power to create changes in what we wanted to do in our community. So that's why that newspaper was so important, because right now we don't have a newspaper. You know, the only thing that we rely on is the main street media, which defines everything for us, and they tell us nothing but lies. And so that takes our power away because we don't have the ability to really define the truth of what's going on. And so you had to go out and sell newspapers, and then if you worked in the breakfast program or you worked in the medical clinic or the liberation school, then you had to work on that. And when you came in from the field, we had weapons class, we had political education class, then you went to bed, and then everybody had to be on security because by this time they were rating officers, so you had to be on security from 10 to 12, 12 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6 to make sure the office wasn't going to be raided. So it was constant. So in January 17th of 1969, the Southern California chapter was hit with a tremendous tragic event, and that was the assassination of Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, the two leaders of the Southern California chapter. Now, the Southern California chapter was the most powerful chapter of the Black Panther Party. And Bunchy Carter had been head of the largest gang in LA called the Slossons. And he left the Slossons and became head of the Southern California chapter. A lot of those guys who were in the Slossons, they left the Slossons and they joined the Black Panther Party. And it's also interesting to note, during the era of the Black Panther Party, gang warfare in America stopped. It stopped. And so it was, to lose Bunchy and to lose John was a tremendous loss for the Black Panther Party, particularly for the Southern California chapter. And I remember going down to the funeral of Bunchy, and I remember it rained for 7 days. And it was something that the Southern California chapter would never recover from the loss of those two young men. Now in Chicago, there was a young man named Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton had marched with Martin Luther King. He used to study the speeches of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and when Fred Hampton spoke, he sounded like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X all rolled into one. And anybody who met Fred Hampton, I got a chance to meet him when he was just starting the chapter in Chicago, and I was like blown away. Anybody met him said, man, this is an incredible human being, incredible. And he was going to be the next great leader. And one of the first things that Fred Hampton does was he goes down to the Black Gang Disciples, the Black Stone Rangers, two largest gangs in America. He tells them that you're going to have to stop fighting each other, you're going to deal with the party. And so the FBI heard about these three entities coming together, and they tried to intervene. They intervened on Jeff Fort and the Blackstone Rangers from joining up with the Panthers, but the Black Gangster Disciples did join up with the Black Panther Party. And they changed their names to the Black Peace Stone Nation and started working with the Black Panther Party. Next thing Fred Hampton does is he goes down to the poor white community, and he starts meeting with the organizers, because the poor white community, there were a lot of poor Appalachians who had migrated to Chicago, so Fred Hampton goes down and meets with them. He also meets Cha-Cha Jimenez, who was head of the Puerto Rican gang called the Young Lords. He convinces Cha-Cha to change his gang into a political organization. And they start working with the party. And so that was the Rainbow Coalition. That was the first Rainbow Coalition that was created by Fred Hampton. And so now by this time, Fred Hampton is getting well known. He was one of the most inspiring speakers that we had in the Black Panther Party. When you heard Fred Hampton spoke, you were going to join the Black Panther Party. And there were a group of lawyers that heard Fred Hampton spoke, and he inspired them so much that they formed an organization called the PLO, People's Law Office, which was dedicated to working with the Black Panther Party. And the PLO, to this day, still is in operation in the city of Chicago, working with poor people in the community. So now on the morning of the evening of December 3rd, Fred Hampton was meeting with the staff, at his apartment. He had just gotten. And, after they finished meeting, everybody went to sleep, because we didn't need a bed to sleep on. We just went to sleep wherever we were. That's how we roll, as you guys say nowadays. But Fred Hampton didn't know that his security head was the FBI informant, and that had given the FBI and Chicago police the layout to Fred Hampton's house. Also had drugged Fred Hampton, put some Seconal in his drink. And so at 4 in the morning, there's a knock on the door on December the 4th, knock on the door. Mark Clark, 19 years old, he's captain of the Peoria chapter. He's on guard duty. He goes to the door with a shotgun. He says, "Who is it?" Shots go through the door and kill him instantly, simultaneously. FBI bursts through the rear door. They come in with their guns blazing. They go into Fred Hampton's room. First they go in the living room where the Panthers are asleep. They get him up, line him against the wall, machine gun him. They go into Fred Hampton's room, and his wife was trying to wake him. His wife is 6 months pregnant. She's trying to wake him, but he won't wake because he's been drugged. So she lays on top of him to protect him. And police come into the room. They pull her off of him. They take her out, and they come back in the room and shoot Fred Hampton in the head 3 times. And they were so afraid of this 21-year-old young man that they shot him in his sleep. And that was when I got the call from June Hilliard, and he told me that Fred Hampton had been killed. That was one of the saddest days of my life in the Black Panther Party. The whole 10 years I was in the Black Panther Party, that was the saddest day. And to this very day, it is still my saddest day. Because Fred Hampton was the next, he was the Messiah. He was the Messiah that the FBI had been talking about, that if ever a Messiah arises, he is to be killed. And Fred Hampton was that Messiah. And oftentimes I think, what if Fred Hampton had still been alive? What if Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, John F. Kennedy, what if they were all still alive? Would we be in the predicament that we are in now? No, that we would not be. We would not be. America would be a much better place. So after the assassination of Fred Hampton, the Chicago chapter, when the first thing they do the very next day is they organize a tour through that house where Fred Hampton was killed. And because the media said the police shot, that the Panthers shot first, that the bullets came from the inside out, and that was nothing but a lie. The bullets, they showed the door where the bullets came from the outside in. And they showed the bloody mattress that Fred Hampton had died on. Over 1,000 people went through that house that day and saw what happened. And they were outraged. The community was outraged. And they knew there was nothing but an assassination. Now, 4 days later, the ATF goes to LA to conduct a raid on the LA chapter. And the LA chapter was the most militarized chapter of all the chapters of the Black Panther Party. They built a sandbag bunker inside their office. They had machine gun nests up on the second floor. And all our offices, most of our offices were fortified. In Seattle, we had sandbags up to the ceiling. We had double sandbags. We had steel on the door. We had gas masks because we knew they were going to come. We knew at some point they were going to come. We were always getting calls from people that might have had some information, said they're going to raid you guys tonight, or people would just call and say, we're going to come get you niggers tonight. But anyway, on this particular night, the LA chapter was pretty much prepared. And so when the SWAT team burst through the door, and the LA chapter taking the chairs and the tables and put them on both sides of the door, because they knew when the SWAT team came in, they liked to go to the right and they liked to go to the left. And the SWAT team came about because of the Black Panther Party. And so when they burst through the door, they couldn't go right, they couldn't go left. The Panthers opened fire on them, blew them right out the door, had a shootout that lasted for almost 6 to 8 hours. And they finally surrendered when they ran out of ammunition, and they were arrested and charged with attempted murder. Now, I don't know how you can be charged with attempted murder for defending yourself. Now, 4 days later, the ATF comes to Seattle, and they want to conduct the same raid on the Seattle chapter. But Seattle was a much smaller city than Chicago and New York. We were very much embedded in the city of Seattle. Everybody knew who we were. The mayor was a fairly liberal mayor, and he decided that he couldn't have that bloodshed on his hands. And so when the ATF came to him and said, we want support to raid the office, he said, no, I'm not going to give it to you. Yeah, I'm not going to give it to you. And so him making that decision, probably saved the lives of many of us who would have been at that community center on that night. But when Mayor Wes Ullman goes back to the mayor's convention a year later in D.C., he's met at the front door by Richard Nixon's right-hand man and told him that he's not welcome because he did not follow the orders that he was supposed to do. And so this led into a church investigation into the activities not only of the Black Panther Party, but also the FBI and the murderous campaign that they led upon the Black Panther Party. So by 1970, I don't have much time, so I'm gonna end it up. By 1972, there was a split in the Black Panther Party. Many of the chapters and branches were brought to Oakland because we wanted to build a base of operations here in Oakland. Around that time, Shirley Chisholm, the first black congresswoman, announced that she was going to run for presidency. And it was the Black Panther Party that jumped and ran to support Shirley Chisholm. Even though a lot of the black politicians, they thought, like, who is this black woman saying that she's going to run for president? And they didn't want to support her. They turned their back on her. But it was the Black Panther Party that understood the importance of what she was doing. And around that same time, we also began to announce our own candidates that were going to run, Bobby Seale for mayor and Elaine Brown for city council. And we developed this campaign to put Bobby Seale and Elaine Brown into the city of Oakland. And so I just remember, you know, it was just such a tremendous feat of organizing. I mean, we had like 350 people out on the streets every day for 3 months, registering people to vote. And they were in pool halls and West Oakland, everywhere. There were people who had never, black people who had never registered to vote before until that particular moment that they began to register the people. And so I remember when we kicked off the campaign at the Oakland Auditorium, the Oakland Auditorium was packed, and we gave away, gave away 10,000 bags of groceries. But I remember, first of all, I remember the Oakland Auditorium with 10,000 empty bags. And I said, damn, how are we gonna do all this? And we had a chicken in every bag, we had a bag of potatoes, we had eggs, we had loaf of bread, we had canned food, everything that Mrs. Jones needs to take care of her family, we had in those bags of groceries. And it took a tremendous feat of organizing to be able to carry that off. But I remember in the Oakland Auditorium when Bobby Seale announced his campaign to run for mayor, he threw his hat into the auditorium and the curtain went up and there were 5,000 bags of groceries behind us, and we gave away those 5,000 bags. And down in West Oakland we gave another, in East Oakland we gave I can't remember the part, we gave another 5,000 bags of groceries away, and we also tested 1,500 people for sickle cell anemia. Because before the Black Panther Party had did an expose in our newspaper about sickle cell anemia, people didn't know what sickle cell anemia was. It was a disease that primarily affected black people. And we did a whole expose in our newspaper, and see, this goes back to power's ability to define, phenomenon, make it act, a desired manner. Because when we did that expose, we went out and started testing thousands of people all across the country, black people all across the country, for sickle cell anemia. So it was a tremendous organizing feat. The campaign moved forward, and we really didn't expect Bobby Seale to win. We really didn't expect Elaine was going to win, but we didn't expect that we were going to come so close. We came so close, and it was shocking for us. And not only that, what happened was there were other politicians who were in the Democratic and other parties who started coming to us because they saw we had a political machine that we could get out the vote. And they started coming to us and asking us to support their campaigns. And that's when Jerry Brown ran for governor the first time, we supported him. And when he became governor, he had 6 positions for judgeships in the city of Oakland. He calls the Black Panther Party up. He calls Elaine Brown up, who was head of the Black Panther Party at the time. Said, if I got these 6 positions for judges, you know some 6 attorneys? And she gave him the name of 6 black attorneys. Those black attorneys became judges. And then we got orders from Huey to approach Lionel Wilson and ask Lionel Wilson if he wanted to become judge. And mayor. Lionel Wilson said yes. We ran his campaign, and the Black Panther Party put the first black mayor into office in Oakland. That was Lionel Wilson.